Sagarika, welcome and thank you for joining us on Net Zero Conversations. Let's start by hearing a little bit about your role at the United Nations Climate Champions. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So back at COP21, the parties or the governments all in the Paris Agreement created the role of the high-level champions, and that's the team that I'm working for at the UN. And the aim of the role of the champions is to basically mobilise everyone who isn't a government, so everyone in the private sector, to take climate action. Why? Because we need everyone involved. The other purpose of the role is to also act as a bridge between parties to the Paris Agreement and everyone that's in the non-state actor community. So the champion's role involves convening cities, states, regions, civil society, youth, business and the finance sector to take climate action and then demonstrate to governments how much action and ambition there is within the non-state actor community to further encourage ambition from governments. And one thing that I'm doing in my role is I'm part of the Secretariat for the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. So this was launched about a year ago, last year, and it's a collaboration between the high-level champions and Mark Carney and Mike Bloomberg.
And you mentioned that there's lots and lots of stakeholders and actors in the kind of fight against climate change, as it were. And there's lots of pledges that we're seeing and commitments being made. But the one thing that often people kind of are curious about is how credible are these plans and commitments? And actually, are they really going to translate into real action?
It's a critical point for this year, and I think it will be for every year as we see the plethora of pledges coming through. So one thing that the champions have been doing is convening a UN campaign called the Race to Zero. And this sets the bar really high for any non-state actors taking climate action. To join the Race to Zero, you need to be part of an initiative that is committing to setting a net zero target. And there's also criteria, and the basic parameters of the criteria are around the 4 Ps. So they are pledge, plan, proceed, and publish. In terms of pledge, the criteria there are very clear and they involve making a pledge at the highest level of the organisation, specifically around net zero by 2050 at the latest, consistent with 1.5. In the plan part, the really critical bit of the criteria is that this is about near-term targets. So the targets need to be not just set out for 2050, but for the next 5 years. And then the proceed part about is execution and actually doing what you said you were going to do. And then on publish, this is about annual reporting on progress and how you are delivering on the promise that you made. But the key bits here for this year are around the target setting and how credible the targets are. So as part of the Race to Zero and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, the champions helped convene Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance, Net Zero Banking Alliance, Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, Net Zero Investment Consultants and Net Zero Financial Service Providers. And many of those members of those alliances are due to set targets this year. So some of the things we look forward to seeing in the targets to prove the credibility and to continue deserving the trust of broader stakeholders are around the quality of the targets. So these need to be based on science and they should clearly set out what scenarios have been used to inform the targets. They should also be near term, as I mentioned, covering 5 years ideally, and they should cover as many scopes as possible. So of course, scope 1 and scope 2, and ideally as much as possible of scope 3 emissions, although that is a very challenging area. In addition to that, my suggestion is that these cover new fossil fuels and what the policies are towards those, and then also transparent reporting. So reporting every 12 months on how these targets are being achieved and what progress is being seen.
Wow, it sounds like a lot of work is going on and it'll be good to see some of those targets being set. Clearly there's lots of different moving parts, but if you were to boil it down, who has the biggest role, in your opinion, to really driving net zero?
So parties to the Paris Agreement or governments clearly have the critical role to play, and we need to see even more ambition this year. What they did agree in Glasgow for the first time was phase out of fossil fuels and fossil fuel subsidies and halting deforestation. What we need to see now this year is that we use this energy security crisis we face as a massive opportunity to scale up clean energy investment. And what financial institutions are increasingly saying is that they would like to see mandatory climate disclosure. But in terms of others, obviously everyone is really important for climate action. Citizens, cities, states, regions, corporates, and the finance community. And the finance community plays a key role by being able to articulate to governments what are the enabling conditions that they need for a net zero transition in terms of the policies, whether that's at a thematic sector level, carbon pricing, and also the finance community needs to play a role in terms of accelerating the transition through the financing that is provided, making sure that's going into the future investments and phasing out over time fossil fuels with a just transition.
And so when we think about net zero, I think it's easy to think that this is just about getting emissions down. But is that true, or are there other wider sustainability issues that really we need to think about along the way?
I think it has to be about the wider sustainability issues, and we can only get to net zero if we address all of these in a really holistic way. So, for example, on the social side, we have to tackle rising energy prices for households. We have to tackle energy poverty, and we have to include workers and communities that are going to be impacted. And much of that is the work that's underway on just transition. But in addition to that, we also need to tackle the broader issues of land use and nature. These are completely interrelated. We can't do climate and net zero without tackling nature hand in hand. And then finally, we have to wake up to the realities of the climate crisis that we face today and the physical impacts of climate change that are already being felt in developing countries, in low-lying islands, but also in developed countries as well, and in key financial centres. And that means that the finance sector needs to get to grips with not only social issues, not only nature, but also with adaptation to climate change, assessing risk, and then working with others to scale up the finance that's needed.
So as we move towards COP27, what practical steps and actions can financial institutions and real economy companies be taking now?
Time is very limited, priorities have to be made, and the 4 areas that I think we really need to focus on are firstly, understanding what are the implications of net zero, and specifically what I suggest for corporates and for financial institutions is looking at sectoral pathways. And there's some excellent analysis that's already out there from the IEA, also emerging from other sources as well. And then secondly, having a clear focus on setting a quality, credible net zero target that can be delivered on, accompanied with a plan for how this will be achieved. Thirdly, I think this COP is going to be the developing country COP, the Africa COP. So for financial institutions and corporates to think about for the future opportunities, where could they be? What innovation is already happening in the continent of Africa? How could these be further de-risked and scaled up? And then finally, a focus on joining the dots between climate and nature. So we have to tackle curbing deforestation and the opportunity set that there is in nature-based solutions.
And one final question, if you don't mind. In your view, what's the one thing we need to do collectively to make COP27 a success?
We need to do net zero implementation. That's the job of financial institutions who have made net zero commitments. I was speaking with my daughter the other day and she said to me, "Mummy, why does it matter if they don't deliver on the net zero commitments? Because they can just say in 2023, well, we're really sorry, we didn't make our net zero promises, but we're going to do it next year." And then I said to her, "Well, what do you think is going to happen next year?" And she said, "Well, they can say next year in 2024, oh, we're so sorry, we were going to make our net zero commitments, but we didn't quite make it, but we're going to do it next year." And then she turned to me and she said, "But Mummy, aren't we going to run out of time?" And I think she's right, we are. That's why we've got to make this year the year of net zero implementation.
Thanks very much.